June 1845. Northern Mariana Islands. A speck of land called Anatahan lifts out of a steel-blue Pacific, volcanic, ringed with surf, a green bowl without a harbor. From the belly of a U.S. Navy seaplane, a radio man squints through binoculars and mutters into his throat mic. Movement on the beach. Waving. Multiple personnel. In a file at SINPAC, the Commander-in-Chief, Pacific, someone slips a memo behind a buff cover stamped "Confidential." Handwritten at the top, an odd count. 32 males, 1 female. Then a line that reads like a riddle. Armed. Refuse evacuation. Claim war continues. A week later, sailors aboard a patrol craft see it with their own eyes. On the hard sand between pandanus trees and wreckage scavenged from a long-ago freighter, a crowd of lean men in ragged trousers gathers around a slight woman with a headscarf. She doesn't wave. She doesn't run. She speaks, and the men move, dividing, deferring, as if the wind itself has learned to listen. Newspapers on Saipan will start to call her something that sells, the Queen of 32 Men. Later, Japanese tabloids will try out a crueler version, the Queen Bee of Anatahan. By then, bodies will have been counted, and stories rehearsed until they shine like stones rubbed in a pocket. Here is what the record, bent and scorched as it is by war, lets us say without making a promise it can't keep. In 1845, as the American Navy closed its fist around the Marianas, dozens of Japanese sailors and soldiers were blown off ships or stranded on islets after their units shattered. Some drifted to Anatahan, a 35-square-mile volcano clothed in jungle and ringed with bad surf. On that island already existed. This is the surprise that rewriters later pretended was invention. A small copra operation with a handful of workers, among them a young woman from Saipan. Her name appears in U.S. interrogation summaries and Japanese repatriation paperwork with a steady consistency rare in these cases. Higa Kazuko. Over the next 6 years, yes, 6, those men refused surrender, organized around weapons recovered from debris and a sense of war that would not let go, and lived under a social order that formed around the only woman on the island. 11 men died by accident or violence before a mass surrender in 1851 ended the siege of a place most maps did not bother to label. The Navy's leaflets called down from the sky in Japanese, "The war is over. Return." Family letters copied onto big sheets with careful brush fluttered into breadfruit branches and along beaches. The answer from the island was a silence built from fear and pride and the terrible momentum of survival. "We cannot come," a messenger told a U.S. officer in 1846. "They will not believe." The press, starved for copy in the slow hunger after war, ate the story whole. "Island Eves and 30 Atoms," crowed one American headline. 32 Men and the Girl, cooed another. Nobody asked the obvious first question. Who was she before any of this happened? Her own later account, recorded on onion skin in a Tokyo room where a publisher placed a glass of barley tea on the table, and a tape recorder between them, insists on one fact that should have been obvious. "I did not rule anyone," she said. "I lived." But there are other accounts. A Navy interpreter who walked the beach at last in 1851 named her calm. A repatriated sailor, drunk and old on a bar stool years later, called her dangerous, then corrected himself. No, not her. The way we were. Joseph von Sternberg, in his 1953 film, The Saga of Anatahan, made her an emblem instead of a person, because emblems earn more. Between them all, lies the truth of an island where 32 men and 1 woman built a country out of wreckage and fear. But why did this happen? And why did the world choose the story it did? If this story intrigues you, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our deep dives into history's darkest, strangest corners. And tell us which city or country you're listening from. We love hearing from our community. Long before she was an emblem or a headline, she was a girl in a place that lived between empires. The Northern Marianas were German once, then Japanese under the South Seas Mandate after World War I, their languages a braid of Chamorro, Japanese, Okinawan, English, and the sea's own grammar. Saipan in the late 1930s was a company town writ large. Sugar mills throbbing, trucks whining, schoolchildren in neat uniforms, Japanese settlers mixing with native islanders and Okinawan workers, all under the arch of a rising sun that promised order and plenty until it didn't. Kazuko Higa's surname places her in Okinawa's diaspora. Higa is an Okinawan name as common as a certain shade of sky. She was born around 1817 to 1819, depending on which official filled which blank. She was married young. The marriage did not hold. By 1843, she was working for or with the overseer of the copra station on Anatahan, a secondary place for oil and dried coconut, too isolated for most, perfect for a handful of tough souls, and a war that made certain jobs either urgent or impossible. Anatahan itself is a lesson in how capricious land can be. A stratovolcano with 2 nested calderas and a ragged skyline, it rises steeply to over 2,500 feet. No harbor, no dock. Landing by boat in calm weather is a gamble. In surf, it's a dare. But the interior holds water and fruit. Coconut, breadfruit, pandanus, taro. Pigs gone feral. The occasional goat in places that don't want you to find them. For a small group, if no one else tries to occupy it, it is survivable. Then the war tore its lines through. In June-July 1844, the battles for Saipan and Tinian broke Japan's forward shield. Ships blew, airfields burned. The American flag rose on assault beaches, and the civilians, Japanese settlers, Chamorro families, were torn from ground they considered theirs to make way for more runway. Ships fleeing the collapse found reefs. Men found water. By late 1844, the island that had been a place of work was a place of exile. Depending on the account, the first arrivals were sailors from a sunk cargo ship, then soldiers from Saipan who made the 7-hour crossing in small boats, then drifters and holdouts. A woman named Higa was there when they came. The plantation man who had been her employer or keeper or both, reports differ on status, was there too. At first, it looked like a story people know. A band of survivors on an island assembling their strength. They set routine the way the starving set snares, collect water, gather breadfruit, rub oil from coconut flesh, scavenge rope and nail heads from a beached broken ship, sharpen knives, find shelter in the gullies where wind can't find you, then learn why the wind can't find you, mosquitoes. They learned quickly which leaves lied and which did not. They taught themselves to live on the line between enough and not yet. Then other men came. 32 by the Navy's cautious count in 1945, more trickling through later. Japanese, a few Okinawans, 2 or 3 Chamorro men left behind by fate and bureaucracy. Some were soldiers with a last order still ringing. Some were sailors with salt in their eyes and nothing on their backs. A few were the sort of men islands create, work fast, talk soft, live long by not insisting on being in charge. Guns changed everything. The survivors salvaged rifles and pistols from shipwreck debris, and in time, a few precious rounds of ammunition. Later, a plane from a battle far away fell into the sea off Anatahan and gave up to the surf its carcass, metal, cloth, wires, so much string and sheet that even a castaway can build a country if he has enough of it. Though the war in the Marianas ended, the war in them did not. The Navy, in love with amplification, broadcast surrender news by loudspeaker from ships just off Anatahan and by mouth from interpreters. The men on the beach replied by not replying. It was not loyalty exactly, and not only fear. It was shame. It was calculation. It was the sick logic of men who believed the world on the other side of the water had disappeared along with their old selves. Into this physics of isolation and pride stepped the fact that became the myth, Higa Kazuko. Alone among men, she became, in the language of every account, the Axis. The plantation supervisor, the man to whom she had been attached before the castaways landed, held position for a time, then the calculus altered. She moved when she wished, one repatriated man told a Tokyo reporter years later, using a verb that suggests both motion and choice. She moved when she wished them to, he added, then laughed, as if he needed to make it a joke to make it safer to say. The first months were orderly enough. Work parties, fishing, the discipline of a uniform, even if the uniform was only the memory of a uniform. A general emerged. He was a petty officer. A general is a gift the memory gives to the dead. Rules were spoken. Other rules went unspoken, but no less strong. The woman is not to be touched except by her man. Later, except by those she chooses. Later still, except by those the men choose. Later again, except by no one because the toll had grown too high. The rules changed because hunger and weather and the slow acid of loneliness changed them. The Navy watched. It could have taken the island by force in an afternoon, but the beach was bad and the end of the war was near, and some admiral had no desire to explain to a congressional committee why there were American dead on a beach named on no map, killed not by enemy combatants, but by men whose minds had chosen to stay lost. The island society thickened. A pig herd, a garden,
a watch on the ridges because hope needs a lookout and delusion demands one. Leaflets fluttered. "Come home, the Emperor has broadcast surrender." The men leaned on the rifles they had oiled with coconut and watched the surf and called it a trick. In 1948, some say a year earlier, the plantation man died. The why is disputed: accident, illness, a fall on a ridge, a blade. Higa emerged from that loss not in flight, but in place. Someone, perhaps Higa herself, hitched a new partner. Later, when that man died, in circumstances no one tells the same way twice, another man moved into the circle. With each rupture, the temperature inside the men rose. The count of dead grew. A drowning with witnesses, a fall with none, a body found in brush with the sort of marks bodies acquire when humans forget they were made of humans first. There is a list, in pencil on Navy legal paper after the surrender, of men dead on Anatahan and the alleged causes. There are 11 names. The paper does not give you the sound of how the accusations were made, what blame feels like when it pours out after 6 years of being trapped. "We are not murderers," one man says in the transcript. "We were—" He cannot finish, or the stenographer could not catch his word. The chaos the press later called her reign looks, in the grain of the few documents that matter, like the opposite. Men reignited by a war they were not brave enough to leave, reframing lust and ownership as an order they could live with. If anyone ruled on Anatahan, it was necessity.
And the way men taught by armies conflate hierarchy with safety. A woman in that crucible learned to bend rules that were not designed to let her live. It starts as so many island stories do, with a boat that makes it to shore and another that doesn't. The first boat arrives in late summer 1944, ruined but afloat. 5 men drag it up the sand while 5 more stagger and fall behind them like the shadows of a bad dream. The men from the Copra station, 2 Samoans, a Chamorro, a Japanese overseer, a young woman carrying a sack of rice like a baby, stand at a distance and weigh a calculus older than war. How much pity a small island can afford. They afford enough: food, water, a shoulder under a new roof. Then another boat, then more. Someone declares a perimeter, because soldiers always do. Someone else keeps a ledger, because civil life is hard to shed. Fishing is good, breadfruit is plentiful. They pride themselves on how close they steer to normal. They elect roles: watch, forage, cobbler, gunsmith, because one man, it turns out, knows how to make a firearm that last saw oil in a factory across an ocean work again and again on coconut oil and prayer. The presenting problem, the phrase is a doctor's and suits this, comes later. The overseer, whose name in the Navy reports reads Y, with a bare honorific after it, decides that the order which existed when there were 4 men no longer applies when there are 24. A former petty officer from Saipan, S, in the same reports, refuses to cede control. Higa, who says nothing that anyone bothers to write down then, moves between their circles the way a hill wind moves, seen only in the way leaves answer. The first death is easy to explain, an avalanche of wet rock on a cliff path that nobody should have been on in the rain. The second is harder, a body pulled from surf with bruises that do not look like the work of water. Men shrug the way men do when acknowledging a thing makes it cost more. He slipped, they say. He was unlucky. On islands, unlucky becomes a verb. He was unluckied. U.S. patrols approach in 1945 and 1946,
launching a plywood skiff into punishing shorebreak, interpreters shouting with cupped hands, "The war has ended, your families are alive." In answer, a group of men with rifles visible on their shoulders shake their heads. "We cannot believe," they call. "We will be shot." It is as if they have borrowed the future from a worse place. Higa stays inland during the first visits, the island's only woman behind the tree line, a scarf-like freshness in a place where fresh is a memory. Men speak for her, the island speaks for her. The garden, the tethered pigs, the iron pot swinging over a fire. "You see," one man shouts to an American, "we do not need your help." On the air, a small committee of shame votes down resupply. Then the plantation man dies. The island, being a machine, stutters but continues. Higa attaches, in the strange grammar the witnesses use later, to S, the petty officer. The men memorialize the deceased with a thing they all remember and none can swear to, an altar made of driftwood and pig tusks where someone once put a piece of aircraft aluminum polished to a shine. People insist she stood beside it, not on it. Details are all anyone can control here. A storm strips one side of the island in 1947, and their neat terraces of taro slump like old faces. After that, the rationing boys, every group has them, take more seriously the division of labor: breadfruit gatherers, fishers, tool makers. 2 men guard the guns, because the guns matter more than anything except the woman. The guns become insurance, and then they become ritual. A show of force becomes a way of arguing. The second leadership struggle is not about food. It is about Higa. The petty officer sleeps with a rifle by the door. Higa sleeps with a small knife under the mat. 8 men move like waves, advance, retreat, around the hut with a palm frond roof and the lantern made from a bottle and a rag. The lantern light makes shadows on the hut wall that look like a play performed in a language no outsider would ever know even if he knew all the words. A Navy PBY flies low in early 1948, engines thumping, and throws down another cascade of letters. One is addressed in large brush script to Higa Kazuko. The woman opens it. Her family tells her in careful maternal honorifics that the war has ended, that she can come home, that whatever shame the trip requires is less than the weight she carries. She shows the letter to S. He frowns, but says nothing. Someone else says everything with his hands later that night. S is found the next morning at the foot of a known dangerous slope. The island has many. Anyone who wanted to invent an accident would have no trouble setting a stage. Higa says nothing in the Navy's later notes except this: "I was afraid. I did not sleep." It does not take 2 days for a new man to be at her door. It takes 1. The system the island has developed, possession by custom, is both a protection and a weapon. The man who steps into S's place is younger, quicker. In the Navy's transcripts, the men call him by a cooing sobriquet that translates roughly, Sparrow. A month later, Sparrow is dead too. By 1950, word on Saipan and Tokyo and Honolulu is a stew of salacious and righteous. The Navy calls the island unpacified, a term that transmutes stasis into agency. Reporters start writing in futures that read like invitation: the mysterious woman, the murderous men, the deserted island. The logic of headlines sands history smooth. In early 1951, A plan forms that everyone later wishes had been thought of sooner. The Navy enlists family members of the holdouts to write letters in their own hands and hires a Japanese-speaking civilian to deliver them in person. The communicator is tasked with one more delicate mission: find the woman, separate her if possible, and ask if this time she will come away. He does. Higa steps out of the brush, thinner, older, the set of her mouth practiced into a line that looks like calm. The man from the ship hands her a letter and tells her the boat can leave the beach in 15 minutes. There is no time for discussion or negotiation. Her answer is either yes, or she returns to a hut with men whose hearts are now welded to a story that cannot survive daylight. "I will go," she says, "but I must get my things." She is gone 5 minutes and returns with a small bag. Inside, a comb, an extra scarf, letters. She rides the surf in the bow of a skiff like a saint in a retablo. On the deck of the Navy ship, sailors look away, then look back. That night, they anchor offshore and broadcast again. "The woman has left," the interpreter says into a horn. He reads names. "So-and-so's wife waits in Kagoshima. So-and-so's mother is in Kumamoto and prays for you to return." The next morning, on the beach, men gather without rifles. The surrender is not dramatic. A group of rag-wrapped men walks across sand, each carrying a bundle that contains either a last tool or a last hope. A Navy officer counts, now 31, not 32. A straggler emerges later, as if he needed to decide alone before he could decide with the group. The interpreter takes their weapons. The U.S. does not arrest them. The war is long over. The Navy gives them cigarettes and a hot meal, and the sort of attention that tastes like mercy when you have told yourself the world owes you nothing. In Saipan, the islanders who remember Higa before she was an emblem watch her come ashore in a borrowed dress that does not belong to this place. In Tokyo, a publisher watches the story step into his office wearing a white blouse and tells a stenographer to be kind. In the accounting that follows, the 11 dead are sorted by category like sheep. Accident, accident, accident. Then 4 slain by persons unknown. Then 2 whose causes a single pencil stroke covered, not reported. If you press your finger hard on that list, you can feel the men underneath it. Men who were not demons, not monsters, just tired and young and older and broken and in love with a version of themselves that only a war could forgive. Who investigated? The Navy, nominally. An interpreter, often named Ikeda in secondary accounts, took statements and filled pages with sentences that start, "He said." The Japanese press investigated by pointing microphones and selling copies. Joseph von Sternberg investigated by deciding what made the best shot. But in the main, no court convened, no advocate spoke uninterrupted, and the woman at the center rarely got to choose which of her words survived. Theories proliferate in the absence of patient listening. The femme fatale. Tabloids crowned her the queen bee, the queen of 32 men, because men died and a woman was present. In this reading, Higa manipulated jealousies for advantage, changing partners with a sovereign's cold hand, permitting violence when it secured her
position and playing victim when it went sour. The trouble is the evidence. Her own statements reject it. The Navy's notes do not support it. The living on an island for 6 years with 30 armed, traumatized men suggests survival, not domination. This theory flatters male fear and the cheap thrill that fear sells. The victim. The opposite simplifies too. In this reading, Higa is a prisoner in a camp of men who study her like a resource and trade her as a unit. She endures assaults, threatened and enacted, and trims her sails to whatever wind keeps her breathing. This reading acknowledges power imbalance and the cage of that isolation. It risks, however, stripping her of agency in the moments where she clearly exercised it, departing when the chance arrived, mediating, according to more than one witness, to prevent killings that men later committed anyway. The collective psychosis. Anatahan in this framing became a petri dish for mass delusion. The war forever mentality piled on isolation, poor diet, and the gender asymmetry produced behaviors no set of norms can easily digest. Higa's presence became a symbol onto which the men projected order and possibility. When those projections failed, they shattered. This reading has the virtue of describing group behavior. It has the vice of dissolving individual responsibility in a bath of sociology. The practical colony. Some analysts, often ex-military, view the island as a micro-colony that functioned better than its press. The deaths, while sensationalized later as murders of passion, were in fact ordinary accidents exaggerated by the island's later fame. Higa took up with different men because widows do. The rest is pulp. This leans on skepticism to the point of blindness. It sidesteps the documented refusal to surrender, the pattern of deaths after certain leadership challenges, and the voices of men who, late at night in barracks after repatriation, cried when they said their friends' names. The cinematic contamination. One reason the story feels slippery is because the movie came first for many. The saga of Anatahan, 1953, is a fever dream, filmed in Japan with sets, stylized voiceover, and deliberate unreality. Sternberg used the skeleton of the facts and made a poem, or a nightmare. The film then fed back into the news accounts, which colored eyewitness memory. The tail wagged the dog, and then the dog was indicted for weird walking. Separate fact from folklore, and a cleaner ledger appears. There were about 30 men and 1 woman on Anatahan at any given time, 1944-1951. Exact counts vary as men arrived and died. Higa Kazuko was on the island before most of the men arrived and left in 1951 on a U.S. vessel, then repatriated to Japan. 11 men died during the occupation. At least several deaths resulted from interpersonal violence. The Navy's own language implies as much. The holdouts refused surrender repeatedly until family letters and Higa's departure changed the momentum. No criminal prosecutions followed repatriation. Japan treated the holdouts as victims of circumstance, and the U.S., eager to close files, let the past rest. The records called it misfortune. The locals whispered something else entirely. What does it mean to be called a queen when you never wore a crown and would have burned it if offered?
After 1951, the island returned to being a green bowl ringed by bad surf. The volcano inside it slept, then woke decades later to remind everyone that islands do not forget. In 2003, Anatahan erupted. Ash fell across the Pacific, and the tiny airstrip on Saipan remembered in gray what the war years had colored.
Higa returned not to Saipan, but to Japan. Her afterlife as a person is spare in the record, as if she had exercised her final agency in pruning herself from view. She gave interviews. She insisted she was not what they said. She worked. She lived indoors. She died, likely in the 1970s, having outlived most of the men who had used her name to make sense of their worst years. The men faded into the tide of post-war life. Some married, some drank, as men do when memory needs a solvent. One wrote a letter to a local editor 2 decades later, defending her, lashing out at sensationalists, naming the movie's director a liar all over again in large, shaky characters. "We were not like that," he wrote, then crossed out the sentence and wrote, smaller, "We were exactly like that sometimes." The story is retold because stories like this are useful. It lets societies ask, how thin is civilization? What happens when you strip rank and habit down to breath and muscle? Who becomes what when you remove shame's audience? Every retelling reveals the teller's fears. Americans in the 1950s made it sex. Japanese papers made it disgrace, redeemed by surrender. Islanders made it a cautionary tale about storms that never end if you let pride name the weather. Perhaps the truth still lies hidden in Navy archives where a junior officer's honest, discreet description sleeps between cables. In Saipan family albums where a young woman who once had a different last name looks away from a camera on a beach where girls had always looked away. In the script drafts in a director's papers where he underlined the word legend and crossed out the word woman. Stand on a beach anywhere at dusk and look at the way men cluster when there is nothing to do except be men. Imagine a woman among them, smart, scared, practical, expensive to herself, walking the line between what they decided she was and what she had to be to survive them. Imagine the men telling themselves they were good because they were still alive, and calling her by a title she never chose, because names help at night. Queen of 32 men is what the papers wrote. Kazuko, perhaps, is what she wished someone, once in a while, had been able to say without turning it into an epitaph. Which version makes the most sense to you? Was Kazuko Higa a manipulator in a closed world? A survivor navigating a cage built by war? Or the scapegoat of a story men told about themselves? Which detail unsettled you the most? The 6-year refusal to surrender? The 11 deaths on an island the size of a town? Or the way a film redefined a woman's life for the world? Tell us in the comments. If this story held you on the surf line with us, please like this video, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss our deep dives into history's strangest, most unsettling episodes. And drop your city and country. We're building a map of our community, one mystery at a time. In our next episode, we'll open a different dossier, a lighthouse log from 1900, 3 keepers, 1 vanished crew, and entries that end with a single word: gone.